Because of the following special program, Mr. Merlin will not be presented this evening.
Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners. Coming February 21st, it's Faye and the Moon, the latest graphic novel from Franco and the Saturn Sisters. Faye, mourning for her missing mother, sits night after night below the moon that her mother loved dearly. One night she discovers she can pluck the moon out of the star-filled sky. Back safe in her house, she holds it close, feeling comfort at last. Then Faye loses the moon and finds that taking it has awakened ancient monsters, rats, dragons, and more, who hunt for it for themselves. Will Faye be able to reclaim the moon, find her own inner strength, and save the world from eternal darkness? Faye and the Moon comes from the minds of Franco, whose works include Tiny Titans, Superman of Smallville, Archimaniacs, Itty Bitty Hellboy, and The Ghost and the Owl, and art from the Saturn Sisters, whose animated works include Sesame Studios' The New Neighbors, Hulu's The Awesomes by Seth Meyers, and PBS's Mira, Selkie from the Sea. Pre-order Faye and the Moon now. Available in bookstores and comic shops everywhere, February 21st.
This portrait of Jean Grey, the Phoenix, is one of the ones I did for a series of single frame mock-up kind of covers for the Marvelocity book, where my concept was it would work like an accordion. When you open up the book, getting past the initial Captain America cover, you would fold it out and you get Iron Man and character after character after character, and it allowed me then to do multiple Marvel character portraits. Phoenix being one of the most primary Marvel concepts, because her storyline back in 1980, the invention of that character, that maturation of Jean Grey into the Phoenix, was one of the best storylines in the history of comics and stands out as one of the most important female superheroes.
Welcome back, everybody. It's time again for Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here. Always happy to welcome Dan Jurgens back to Word Balloon. Good to see you, Dan. You look great.
Thank you, John. It's good to see you again. Been too long.
No kidding, man. Absolutely. And certainly everyone is thinking about you because was it last week that James Gunn made the announcement of the initial slate of DCU projects for television and film. Yep. And among them, wouldn't you figure, a guy that you created, 39 years ago? Was it 84?
It's been a while. It's been a long time, yes.
Booster Gold, everybody.
Yeah.
Jeez. And you know, it's so funny, Dan. I've got a good friend that's a little bit younger than me. And he's like, well, just so you remember, Booster Gold, operated out of Metropolis. And the Legion was after him. I'm like, yes, I know. I was reading from day one. And it's so great, Dan. I'm so glad. God, I'm going to show some images that you were posting on your Twitter feed. Those initial character designs, would you mind? Because I know you did a great job in the thread about this, and you were very brief, but I want to give you a chance to expand. Let's talk about the inception of Booster Gold. And here's those original character designs, I believe, that Dan submitted.
Yeah, and then you can also see on there that ultimately we ended up running with, you can take little bits and pieces out of almost all of them to see which one we ended up going with. It was if we go back to 1984 and what DC was at that time, Paul Levitz, Dick Giordano, Jeanette Kahn, the philosophy was that they had an open door and they were always looking for new ideas. And I was actually at a convention in Dallas, Texas at one point, late in 84. And I told Dick I wanted to talk to him because I had an idea. And we went to breakfast Sunday morning of that weekend. And I just started to lay out the broad strokes of what Booster Gold would be, that he was someone from the future who had been a thief, stole the goods to come back and be a superhero, and that the goods were actually rooted in DC's past, and but that more than anything, what he was going to do was use the power of celebrity to enhance his image, to make a living while also doing a few good deeds here and there. And Dick kept trying to say, well, you mean he's a hero for hire? And I'd say, no, 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 no. That's not it at all. He's playing the celebrity game. He's going to go out and cash in, and he will sell advertising, and he will do commercials, and he'll endorse products. And, if he's off to save someone, he might just call, CNN on the way there and say, come film this, that kind of thing. And by the time we got done talking about it, Dick went for it on the spot. And, I didn't have any sketches at that point. I didn't even have anything written up. I just had this idea of exactly how it was going to work and what it was going to be. And by the time we were done, one of the things he said is that he was able to green light 1 or 2 projects a year. On his own, he just said, this is a go. You're good to go. And then later, once we were all back in place, he said, by the way, I do need to get something on paper so we can get legal started on the contracts, but we were off and running.
That's amazing, man. And it's so great because it takes place in the modern era. You've got Booster coming from, am I right, the 25th century?
Yep.
And then, of course, the mystery of Brainiac 5's force field belt and the Legion flight ring. And it's like, how did this guy get this stuff? It's in the Space Museum, but it's from 500 years in the future.
Right.
And oh my God, it's so great, man. I mean, just that initial, atmosphere of Booster, and we'll get into his character, but that's great, man. It really, what were you thinking?
Well, so I thought this.
What were you thinking?
No, really, I think what it also kind of shows is someone who is kind of learning as they were earning. I had always said, in some ways, I wish I would have waited a few years to do Booster Gold, because I would have been better at it in the first couple of years, where the stories would have been a little better. But at the same time, the character was there, and the nuts and bolts of the character were there, and the things that made him different from most of DC were there at the time. Because if we go back to that time at DC, so, and it was also tailored to come out and be one of the first, if not the first, post-Crisis heroes, because this is when Crisis on Infinite Earths was running, that, it was a great time to be there, and a great time to introduce a character like that, because most all the other characters at DC were really still kind of perfect, and, obviously within the next couple of years, a lot of that would change. But he fit in well because he was unique. And that's why, within fairly short order, Keith Giffen gave me a call one day and said, hey, is it okay if I put this guy in the Justice League? I like what you're doing. I want him in the Justice League. And so they were just launching the book, and he was there as of, I think, issue 4. So, again, off and running.
And obviously, what a gift. Was it Keith's idea and Mark DeMatteis to build on that Booster Beetle relationship that has just been so wonderful over these years?
Well, I don't think they were really building on it, because we had not gotten to it yet in our book. And it's one of those things that this is my memory, and Mark and Keith might, remember it differently. But when Keith was kind of telling me how they wanted to use the character and what he was going to be, I don't think he saw initially Booster and Beetle, being the buddy cop sort of thing. I think that developed the more they worked on it. Yeah, they might say differently, but when Keith and I first started talking, he didn't really mention it that way. In fact, at one point, I thought he said more about, Captain Marvel. And there's a scene where I can't remember if it's the first appearance in the League or not, but one of the first couple of issues where Captain Marvel is kind of looking at Booster Gold and he thinks, gee, neat costume, something like that. And I think originally it might have been supposed to go that way, and ultimately, Beetle was a natural.
That's so great, man. All right. And Michael, obviously, as you say, this is a guy that was a screw up back in the 25th century and seizes this opportunity to go back in time and make himself, this amazing hero. And it's so funny, as you say, that he, when pitching to Dick Giordano, that, he can call CNN and stuff like that. That was cutting edge back then. That is still when cable was really just penetrating the full country, and CNN was a big deal. And as you said, even in your Twitter feed, God, isn't it amazing with social media how Booster continues to become more and more relevant as the years have progressed? That's not, I mean, everyone points at how almost anachronistic a concept like Superman is. And that, and even I had this conversation with Matt Wagner about a lot of heroes work best if you put them in the decade in which they were created. Booster's the exception.
Yeah,
Booster is, evolving as we're or devolving as we're devolving.
But no, I think that's a very good point, and especially because, so even if you think of something like the Fantastic Four and their origin in the 60s, and we think of what geopolitics were at that time and what the world was like, they have been able to flex very well into our time frame now. But at the same time, you can really see the roots are there, in that 60-61 time frame. So, we're fortunate that it worked out that way. But yeah, I mean, when you think about it, People magazine hadn't even been around really all that long. The whole idea of celebrity culture has done nothing but grow since then, and continues to grow. And that's one of the reasons that it would make something like this a little more viable. And a lot of it was just rooted in me thinking, I was a little younger at the time, and just me thinking, well, if I had superpowers, yeah, I might do, the right thing, but why not make a little money at it at the same time? Why not use it somewhat to your advantage? And I know that later when we did the Blue and Gold miniseries, I had Booster explaining to Beetle, well, Batman's a millionaire. Sure, he can be all full of virtue, and Superman can type 3 million words in a minute, and he can be full of virtue. I have to make a living somehow. So, that's how it goes.
I so hear you, man. No, that is excellent. All right, first, some great comments from people that are just want to, send you love. Caesar of Rome wants to say thank you for creating Booster Gold. Wayne says, I'm glad you took Edna's advice about no capes. And we certainly saw in some of these early concepts, there's a cape, there's a cape. Yep. So yeah, no, it's a clean, contrasting look. More, let's see. Tevye says my first exposure to Booster Gold was in the Justice League in an Unlimited animated series.
Oh yeah, that was awesome.
And also Smallville, great Smallville episode. I should ask, and I will get to questions, everybody, but I should ask. Someone online, obviously, when the announcement was made, was already starting to cast and stuff, and I can't think of the actor's name. The guy who plays, Senator, the senator that was the astronaut. Damn it, shame on me. John Glenn. The guy who played John Glenn in Hidden Figures, about all the NASA computers. Yep. Okay. And I could see him being Booster. He's a good, clean-cut guy. But honestly, it's weird. And again, maybe he's too old. But I thought Christopher Titus would have the right attitude and look. I mean, he's not a football player the way Michael was. But to me, it just seemed like he would have made a great Booster Gold myself. But have you envisioned, guys?
Without naming any names or anything, because it might get a little too newsworthy. The thing I've always said about Booster is it's someone with that quick look where you almost like them instantly, and a disarming smile. And I think that's the big one, the disarming smile that just makes you somehow like him right from the word go. Because part of it is, if his face is going to be on cereal boxes or, whatever other product you can imagine, that's got to be a part of it, right? So it's that disarming smile, that quick wink. Some of what, they played up very well in Smallville when he was on that. They added the enhanced twinkle on the teeth kind of thing. But seriously, those are the attributes I think that kind of have to be there.
Fair enough. People are making their personal choices known. Nathan Fillion when he was younger. Tevye said Chris Pine as well. Tevye wanted to know if you ever thought, and certainly we're going to talk about what you're doing right now with Jonathan Kent, but he wondered if you could have Booster team up with Jonathan as a child. what adventures would you like to have them go on? And of course, hey, Booster can travel through time. So, I mean,
Oh, yeah.
it's certainly possible.
Yes, and it's possible. And it's funny they ask because I do have a story in mind for something like that. Part of it is always finding the right vehicle, and the other part of it is some time ago I did a Rip Hunter series with Booster Gold and everything.
Yes, you did.
And it just so happens that Booster Gold is Rip Hunter's father.
Yep.
And in that we saw the relationship between Booster, who was older by then, and Rip Hunter as about a 10-year-old kid. And I've always thought there'd be a fun mix between those guys all together.
Wow.
It's like, Superman and Booster and the two kids. And I've always thought, okay, I need to be able to do that somewhere, some way, somehow.
That is so great. That's an amazing idea. And also, again, we can go more into detail and people can ask about this. Did I put it up? Oh, I haven't put it up yet. I'll grab it while we're talking. But it was great to see you use young John in your Doomsday special story that you did. Man, what a great story. And really, listen, I have no problem with late teens John, but there are so many other story opportunities, what you just described, what you did in the Doomsday thing. And there's so many conversations that we want to see, I think, Superman and young John still have as a child. And God, I'll tell you, as someone who lost my dad at an early age, it really touched me. And there was even a couple of health scares prior to his death. And I've felt what John felt in terms of, you almost died? When were you going to tell me this? And those are great conversations, man. Well done in that story.
Thank you. And John was really, he represented new readers because, I mean, let's be honest. Death of Superman is, 30 years ago now.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to assume that everybody knows exactly what we were necessarily talking about. So the idea of using John as that vehicle and John being in a school classroom where he starts to find out about it the first time because Lois and Clark hadn't mentioned it, which I think parents probably wouldn't necessarily have done, that it ended up, John was the perfect vehicle through which we could see that story. And because part of it was also not just saying, there was a doomsday, here's a doom breaker, but also sort of that secondary level of conversation of the world went nuts at that time. And for us, and I think comics in general and everything around the death of Superman, the world went nuts at that time. So I thought it was a lot of fun.
I agree, man. It's that whole issue, your story, Walter's story, Jerry's story as well. And I'm forgetting who the fourth one was.
Roger Stern.
Roger Stern, of course.
Yeah, Roger and Butch, and Wheezy and Bog did their story.
Yes, and Louise
and Jerry and Tom.
John. Yes, I mean that's the thing, man. It really, they're great stories. It shows all of your abilities to tell one-shot stories, and certainly in the cases of the others, 10-page stories, whatever they were. Great stuff, man. No, and it at the same time I felt were modern stories, but evoked that period when you were all working on Superman. It was really terrific. I really love this special. And like I was telling you off there, I'm like, God damn it, why didn't we talk about this when it was coming out? Damn it. So, but it's still available, so people can
It is, yes, it is.
It's a great volume. It really is beautiful art. I really adore it. So that was great. I want to go back. Let's see. Oh, and in fact, here we go. They mentioned the Mon Pa Kent story in Death of Superman was also great. Yeah, I believe, was that Walters?
No, that was Jerry Ordway and Tom Grummett. Yeah.
It was Ordway. That's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And and the funny thing is that as we kind of put this together and talked to the other creative teams about what they might do, of course, it was so logical for Wheezy and John to go down the road with Steel, for example.
Yes, John Henry. Henry prior to the Armor.
Yeah, exactly.
Expanding in that moment of Reign of the Superman.
Yeah, you get that extra level of information that we didn't have time to do 30 years ago. Just as it was nice to get a little bit more of a focus on, Mon Pa Kent and dealing with everything they did in the moment. Just this idea of the photo album. And of course, Roger getting into Cadmus and the Guardian and everything. So we all sort of followed kind of in a way the same paths that we often followed as writers back then. And we just did it naturally. So I thought it was a lot of fun. Came together well.
Absolutely, man. No, it's a great volume, everybody. And, you might have thought seeing the cover that it was a reprint of The Death of Superman. They are all new stories. And really, everybody's at the top of their game, just killing it.
And awesome pinups.
Amazing pinups. You're absolutely, shame on me.
Yeah.
Absolutely, man. From people as diverse as Clay Mann and Bill Sienkiewicz, to others that right now are escaping my brain. But it is outstanding. All right, Tevye. Now we've started, but we really didn't get a direct answer. Obviously, she wanted to know how you felt when was Gunn's announcement when you first heard that they want to make a booster show?
A little birdie had mentioned it to me a little bit earlier, but by and large, it's obviously, I think it's awesome. And part of it is because I remember sitting in the theater watching Guardians of the Galaxy. And I was actually sitting there thinking in that moment that the spirit of that movie, the feel of that movie, and also keeping in mind that at that point, they weren't exactly Marvel A-list characters, but everything about it, I'm sitting there going, yeah, this is what Booster Gold would be as a movie and as a franchise. And around that time, Booster had already been optioned once as a Sci-Fi Network TV series and got into development and had a script written, and then boom, changes there, stopped that in the tracks, and then was optioned as a film. And same thing, that just, we had a script generated and then it didn't go beyond that. But somehow this one feels so right. And I think is in really good hands. And again, like I said, I just go back to the way I was watching Guardians of the Galaxy 1 and thinking, yeah, this is what Booster would be to DC. That kind of just the feel of it, and the idea that it doesn't need to be an so-called A-list character to make a good flick or a good story. In fact, you have a little more leeway to play if it isn't, I think. And also was the soundtrack, because that's my kind of music, so it was all there.
Come on. Yeah. Dan, we're not that far apart, man. And absolutely.
Right.
The music of our childhood. No question about that.
Yep.
But agreed. And also, even in the DC universe, what James did with the Suicide Squad and all those C-level Polka Dot Man and all these other ridiculous Ratcatcher, all these ridiculous villains. And it's like, oh my God, of course, this guy gets it. And Booster is, again, he's the right hero at the right time in this atmosphere. You can see him at that ridiculous pink wall that's in LA that all the, I hate the words, social influencers are standing there in their leotard and their energy drink and stuff. And, it's like, come on, that's Booster Gold, man.
It is. And then, and I think what also sets it up is someone like that in the way they would mix with the rest of the DCU. And because to me, that's always the key, because I grew up, as did you, John, with when the Justice League was together. By and large, they were all the same person, right? And there'd be little differences here and there, but again, they were all perfect.
Yes.
And it's much more interesting to have someone like that in the mix. And so, can't wait to see what comes.
I so hear you, man. Now, it is early. I mean, good Lord, he's still writing Superman and the Batman Brave and Bold and all this stuff. And God only knows at what level of development he is in. You might have more inside information. I'm not going to ask you. But given the announcement, have you talked to DC? Is there thoughts of, striking now with something new? Obviously, when it's ready, I would imagine, definitely, no question. But you just said while I was blathering, it's coming.
No, I just said it has come up. I mean, obviously, you generally don't put anything together, in just a couple of days.
Sure.
But it would be silly not to do something. And I have always said, and again, just last year, Ryan Sook and I did the Blue and Gold miniseries, and we had a lot of fun with it. And I always said at that time, let's do a second project. Let's find a way to keep this out there, because strangely enough, I still do enjoy doing a good Booster story.
I think the stories present themselves as our society devolves. Now, if people want the classic run, I saw you put up that these 2 volumes cover the '80s run, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. With again, they have all sorts of, especially the first volume, behind the scenes type stuff added and everything. DC did a wonderful job pulling all that together. And those 2 hardcovers cover, the first 25 issues and the appearance and secret origins of the character. So to the extent you can still find it out there, I mean, that's what I found out is when I put it up, everybody said, well, dude, thanks, but I can't find it anywhere. So, might have to go back to press or something.
Way makes an observation, and I suppose it's true. He felt like Booster's costume is like NASCAR's driver suits. Was that in your mind, designing Booster?
A little bit, and then it a couple of times, a couple of guys have played around with the idea of putting advertising on the costume itself and things like that. And I
remember the new 52 Booster having those ads on his costume,
which is also a bit of a natural. But yeah, it's it's funny in looking at those sketches. When one of the animated shows had someone come up to him and call him Green Lantern, and that has always become kind of a joke ever since, right? And then I look at the costumes in the sketches, like, oh yeah, there's a little Green Lantern there, and there's a little of this character and a little of that character. It's like, it just depends on which one you would have chosen. Fortunately, I think we went the right way.
I agree. No, it's amazing. Let's as I showed those images, we got to talk about Skeets for a second.
Yeah,
the Jiminy Cricket perhaps might have been in your mind when you initially created him, but now, God, you look at that great Iron Man inside the helmet schematics that we get now in movies and stuff. I would imagine that's a great opportunity for not only to show Skeets flying by and stuff and a great little CGI thing, but also getting inside Skeets' head.
Oh, yeah.
Really, and then really getting those kind of printouts for Skeets.
Yeah, absolutely. And really the reason Skeets was there was I thought, okay, if you're going to have a character who's going to be, a little goofy and always making the jokes and everything, everyone, if you think of a comedy duo, you have to have a straight guy then, right? And so that's what Skeets was supposed to be. And also from a writing perspective, it always gave Booster someone to talk to and someone to talk to Booster about setting things up right, which is way more entertaining than what we had back then was thought balloons. So yeah, that's why Skeets is there. So I think he would always also make a fun presence on film.
Agreed. And truly, again, Booster coming back into the past and certainly early on, who could he trust? So really, Skeets is really like the only guy that really knows who he is and that he can talk to and stuff.
Yeah.
No, and I loved even the turn in 52, and I know you weren't writing it, but when they corrupted Skeets,
oh yeah,
evil for a minute and stuff. Did you ever play with that in any of your stories where Skeets got corrupted and went bad for a moment or whatever?
No, we hadn't. It's funny. It's the stuff we talk about, and it's weird how a lot of this is coming back to me now. I know we kicked around the idea at one point, and it was because I don't know if you remember this, but there was a crossover at DC that had a lot to do with the Manhunters.
Of course.
And
yes.
one of the edicts that came down from above was every single book that DC was publishing had to have someone who was going to betray the hero. There was a hidden Manhunter in every cast, right? And at the time I said, Skeets would be the perfect guy. And they said, no, it can't be Skeets. It has to be a human being. So we actually picked Booster's agent. But that's the first time we really started to play with the idea.
Did Michael ever go back to the 2500s and
Yeah, he did. So actually in that first volume of stories, there's a cop from the future by the name of Broderick who comes back looking for Booster. And then ultimately Booster has to go back to the 25th century and straighten some things out because he still had family there as well. And so that was another part of it. But yeah, he did actually do that. And it was part of it where he did go back into the future. And, the interesting thing about Broderick is a little bit of history is the morning I had the breakfast with Dick Giordano and sold the character, Pat Broderick and I were both at the con together and we hit the pool and hit the sauna and everything first thing in the morning. And then I said, well, I've got to go to breakfast. And he was wishing me luck. He said, don't worry, this sounds good. This character is named after Pat Broderick.
That's fantastic. Oh, yeah, that's great, man. Oh, too funny. Tevye wanted to know, going back to John Kent, was wondering if you saw the Super Sons movie on it, because now it's on HBO Max. Personally, he thinks that pardon me, Tevye, I'm not sure, but I think the movie is great. A great introduction to John Kent. I liked it. Great movie.
I haven't seen it yet. It's on. I got to do that. It's. I definitely have to. No, I have not yet seen it.
My hairdo is a slight tribute to the Spit Curl.
There you go.
I need a haircut. A lot of product in my hair. I need a haircut desperately. Tevye also says, speaking of Booster Gold, I'm wondering if during the New 52, I know it's a sore subject, but I was wondering why Booster didn't just treat Jamie Reyes. Why did Booster treat Jamie Reyes, Blue Beetle, like an enemy? Did he?
I'm not in New 52. I don't know where that necessarily happened. I had Booster in Justice League International, which I was writing at the time. And I don't remember it happening there. I don't think I did that. So I'm not sure who necessarily did. I don't, to a certain extent, and I don't do this with all stories, but there are some Booster Gold stories where I look at it and said, I didn't write it, so it didn't happen, which is because I think it was inaccurate. And I don't recall that one, I'm afraid.
I understand, man. No, and I really hope, and sorry, everybody, I was reading and I didn't say Jaime instead of Jamie. But I hope in the Jaime movie that we might see a Michael cameo.
Yeah, I wonder about that. That would be interesting.
Because certainly, regardless, Booster and the Beetle, just the Beetle legacy and stuff, they're tied together. I should mention too, last night I had Jason Inman on.
Okay.
And he wanted to make sure that we start spreading this word. So everyone listening and everybody watching, it started with Jason's show, but we all want a campaign to begin where James Gunn does the same kind of solid that he did for John Ostrander, putting him in the Suicide Squad movie. That you get a cameo in the Booster movie. And Jason had a great idea that you're the manager of the Space Museum yelling, "Hey, Michael, get back to work. Quick around. Clean up the bathroom," or some line like that. Or something. Yeah. That would be great, man. I hope they do it.
Or overflow in the men's room. It's your duty, dude. Get to it. Yeah, exactly. Booster says, "No, I'm out of here."
Oh, that'd be great, man.
Yeah.
Have they done anything like Jurgens Way or Jurgens City or whatever? I mean, have they put your name in any of the cartoons or the movies or TV?
It's in the Arrowverse. There have been a couple of things. Yeah. And I appreciate that. Really though, I think it's something where greater acknowledgement should be paid to the creators of a lot of these characters, if not all the characters anyway.
Amen, son.
Yep. It's one of those things where I understand where there are some cloudy circumstances behind the creation of some characters. I get that. Other ones are crystal clear and they know absolutely who they are. And I have always felt this way, that there should be a credit. And I know that on a couple of Booster's animated appearances, there was a nice special call out, Booster Gold created by Dan Jurgens.
Good.
Like its own title card, which I appreciate. And I think all the creators appreciate and value.
That's great. Now, Dan, it is a different regime now than the Smallville appearance
or
those animated appearances. And forgive me for if this is too personal, did you get some compensation from being on from Booster being on Smallville?
Oh, yeah. And in a way, yes. The compensation has been, certainly fair. And
okay,
I'm talking more about the creator credit.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Yes.
And so there are two different things there. Compensation is taken care of contractually. And in some cases, DC has always been very good about, recognizing creative contributions from people in regards to characters when they are used. I'm talking more about the credits, the way they play out. I think some of these things, which are just the special thanks to type stuff, or, so-and-so street or avenue or something like that. I think we're at the point now where we're at with these characters and where the media are at, that we could do a little better.
Agreed. And truly, I do think, as you said, with certain characters, you see it in the credits on the animation all the time. You see it on the TV shows. We just wrapped up Stargirl, and the Arrowverse is winding down now with Flash.
Yeah, and can I just say,
Please.
Stargirl? Okay, Stargirl to me is the perfect example because listed as creating the character are Jeff Johns and Lee Moder, I believe, right?
The late Lee Moder, yeah.
The late Lee Moder, and thank goodness that he got to enjoy seeing his name listed that way.
Agreed. 3 seasons too.
Yes,
and I really love Stargirl. I thought it was a tremendous show, and it also debuted at the right time, right at the height of COVID. We're all in lockdown. Everyone's depressed. Hey, here's a happy family show.
Yeah,
and it's like, and also was sinister in a really good way. I love the way they used the Injustice gang or society. Yeah. I loved it. And then, as we mentioned, the Arrowverse, and it's winding down. What'd you think? Did you enjoy it? Did you, as an observer? I mean, how much did you watch?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think now we've gotten to the point where we take too much of this stuff almost for granted. But so if we go back to when Arrow started, and then Flash, which was just on again last night. To think that we then got to see this many years of, I think at its peak, like 3 shows a week, if you look at the various different series that we're on and the cast of characters that went through these shows. I think it's been a fantastic experience. And even, Flash is still running. We've got the Superman and Lois series that's going. And it's just great to have those things out there in terms of a vehicle, because what it does, the world, I think, pretty much thinks, for example, that it knows Superman. Yet this is a different sort of Superman. It's Superman married to Lois with 2 kids, on the farm and everything else. And it shows them a different side of the character. And I think that's what's good. It shows the world how expansive these characters and concepts can be.
I agree with you on that. And I love Superman and Lois. And also, I figured this was going to be the last season. And I guess they're saying there at least will be one more season after this one.
That'd be great. I would love to see
that cast. Tyler Hoechlin is a wonderful Superman. And damn it, sorry, everybody, I don't remember the actress that plays Lois's name, but she is a great Lois. And really, I thought, we had a good run with Tom Welling and Lois from the Smallville show. But these 2 are great. And, God, as you know, and especially a guy that spent a lot of time in the Superman universe and everything, Lois and Jimmy, and even Jimmy as well. And it's funny, Jimmy's been on my mind today. But they're such great characters. And I wish that there were more ongoing efforts for both of them. But Lois is such a strong woman character. And I mean, God, as soon as I started doing word pulling, I'm like, why isn't there a Lois Lane series? She is so great. And I think we see that in Superman and Lois, how great she can be.
Yeah. And, they took a swing at it recently. DC had a Lois series out there. And, I think it's also always worth noting, and I make this point fairly often, that so we go all the way back to 1938 and Action #1 comes out and we see Clark Kent, we see Superman. You also see Lois Lane. I mean, she was there right from day one. And that's where it was captured so well in Superman's movie that, she's obviously just a core part of that entire story and is so much of what helps to humanize Superman. So, yeah, I'm with you 100%.
I remember Mark Waid discovering notes from Jerry Siegel from around 1940 that Clark was going to reveal his identity to Lois, and they were going to be a team. And really kind of a Nick and Nora Charles, like the Thin Man couple. Or, God, what Matt Wagner and Steve Siegel did in Sandman Mystery Theater, making Diane Belmont that kind of strong companion to the hero and stuff. So I think that's...
And let me just say, I could go for some more Sandman Mystery Theater.
Dude, I'm
Awesome
so
book.
with you. It's such
Yeah.
Wesley is such a great character, and I
Yeah.
also love that they depicted him. I mean, I loved him even in the Silver Age and the Bronze Age when he'd show up and he'd be another great, like you said, and just another bland Justice League character. But the way Matt and Steve made him frail, and Guy Davis, of course,
Yes.
made him frail and just this meek little schlub of a guy that put the coat on, put the mask and the hat on, and just did it, and got
Yeah.
even that great Starman uh, uh, issue or two where Wesley's in his 90s or whatever, and has the gun and the mask and the hat on, and Jack says, "Look at him, he's smiling, he's loving this," and
Yeah.
it's like that's how great Wesley is. So I'm so with you, like all ages, and I liked the new Sandman that they've made since. But yeah, there's some again. This is what Matt Wagner was saying. You put these characters in their era, and I think
Right.
it's a fascinating dawn of the super age. Let's throw Dr. Occult in there. Let's throw Slam Bradley. All those other plainclothes characters that were surrounding those early adventure and action comics.
Yeah. And it actually, and the nice thing is with Sandman Mystery Theater, I know we're way off the beaten path here, but that gas mask so fit that era. And the art in it was so appropriate. It was a great book. Wonderful book.
100%, man. Oh, Sergio wants to know what's, in your opinion, what's the best era in comics?
Well, it's been said by people, far smarter than me and probably both of us that, the best era of comics was always when you were what, 10, 12 years old, something like that. And I think we all remember it that way. I think, quite honestly, it depends on what it is you like about comics. For example, the 90s was a great era if you were into that kind of high energy, big visual, big power sort of story, because that's a lot of what we were back then, right? Comics right now is about something a little bit different. It depends on, everyone's going to answer that question differently.
Do you feel during that 90s period, Dan? And again, it was, it's just another calendar year or whatever, but because the books did lean more into visual action and stuff, did that affect your writing when you were doing books?
I think I would alter the question just a little bit. And some of it would be by answering that I think we sort of saw ourselves as having something of a different reader at that time. The one thing I do know that is so different now from what I saw then is, so if it's, 1988, 1990, so I'm being very careful to make sure I even delineate before the launch of Image. I could go in a comic book shop on a Saturday afternoon and be filled with, 14-year-old kids, and they were buying comics. That is something I don't see that much of anymore. So I think what we were aware of is that if we were selling, say, 200, 350,000 copies, something like that of something, that we had a more general audience, and perhaps a younger audience. Whereas right now, I think we're very much focused on a much smaller group of people, the hardcores that come in time after time after time. And my fear is that too often we have made our product impenetrable for more casual and entry level readers.
I hear what you're saying. It's no, it is and again, the different distractions that kids have now,
right,
compared to what we had when we were kids, and even up through the pre internet and computer age.
Yeah,
I mean, that's really comics catered to a younger audience in that way.
Yeah.
So no, I hear you. Tevye wants to know if you were able to have Jonathan as his little 10-year-old self and Clark crossover with Marvel characters, which would you like him to cross over with?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, interesting.
I've never even given that a second's thought. The first thing that comes to mind are maybe like Reed Richards and Franklin.
That's a great idea. Sure.
That's almost like, and that's where I say, okay, your first idea is the one you should not go with. So, I'd have to think a little bit beyond that then and come up with something different. So that's funny. I've never really given that any thought.
I have to zoom in and show you a great picture of Superman with the Fantastic Four. That wonderful
yeah.
crossover. So there's already a precedent that Clark.
That's true. That's
Reed
true.
can
Yeah,
sit down
and
have a
Franklin played a prominent role in that. Yeah.
That's awesome, man. Oh, you see it, Tevye agrees. That sounds great. Yeah. Oh, that's funny. Henry wanted to ask about that photo and really that great painting that now that's Alex, isn't it, that painted that, or was
that's me? That's me with Alex. I penciled it, and then Alex painted right over the pencils.
That's so great.
Oh yeah, and it's such an honor to work with Alex on something that I couldn't not have it hung up. So yeah, and that was Superman Fantastic Four crossover that we did. Oh gosh, what year was that? 97-ish, maybe.
Sure.
Yeah. And we actually got to do it treasury size edition.
Yes,
which is what made it so fun. Yeah.
Coming off all those other treasury size Alex Ross books. Oh no, man. And honestly,
in the story, Superman becomes a herald of Galactus because it was a natural. Why not? Yeah.
Hey man, that's fantastic. Oh God, I want to get this comment here because I think they're right. Here, Robert's 100. Here's something that's not said enough. Dan Jurgens made Superman books fun. Amen.
Thank you.
Absolutely, man. No, and truly, every time you come back to the character, we're all really excited. So, that's what on your shelf, I guess, Tev, you notice you have a Starro action figure as well.
Oh yeah, that's that was a San Diego exclusive from 2004, 5, something
Outstanding.
like that, maybe? Yeah.
That's great.
With the first Justice League appearance in Brave and Bold.
Sure, absolutely, man. I know. I was of two minds when he showed up in the Suicide Squad. I really wanted more of the Wetworks disrupting the Latin American regime story than hey, it's Starro. But the Starro stuff was cool and certainly in its moment. So it
was, and to me, so Starro shows up and it's all this. It was a lot of fun. It was fun to see. Okay, how are they going to visualize this giant starfish, right? But at the same time, wasn't there just a part of you that said, yeah, but now I need Superman and Martian Manhunter and Wonder Woman, and where are they? Yeah.
That's honestly, that was the problem I felt with the first Suicide Squad movie. Because it's like, listen, I like Harley, but what is Harley and her sledgehammer going to do against, a dark god with supernatural powers? I'm like, no. And that's why, like I said, I wanted the Wetworks Latin American story more so than Starro. But I have to say also, not only in the Suicide Squad movie, but back in the Brave and Bold cartoon, they had a great use of Starro as well.
Oh, yes.
And when you see those stars, those starfish on people's faces, it is scary. It is cool that even in live action, it looks scary.
Oh, yeah. And the first time that I had that feeling about Starro, and gosh, I wish I could remember the cover. Brian Boland did a story where we saw the Justice League with the starfish on the faces. And he's the one who really elevated it to that creepy level that was so cool. And I remember seeing that, and I don't remember the cover. I think it was Justice League, but I'm not 100% sure. But it was just awesome. It was absolutely awesome.
Oh, this is nice. Zach is remembering when we did that online convention and we did the roundtable of yourself and Elliot Magan and, a few other, Paul Kupperberg, and maybe Jerry. I think the four of you guys.
Okay.
And we had you guys all talking about your time on Superman going back and forth. So, it was one of our online cons. It was either for Baltimore or it was for Mainframe Con.
Yeah, might have been that one. It's, we do so many of these.
Oh, absolutely.
They blend together. They really do.
And it's fine. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Dan, that's, and really, I'm so glad you guys are willing to do these, not just my show and my convention, but so many others, because it's really interesting. I mean, this is why I created Word Balloon. I got spoiled going to conventions and hearing these incredible either spotlights where you're solo or you're with a group. I mean, we just did it last summer at Terrificon when we had all of you guys talking about Spider-Man. No, those are great. And it's great to hear everybody telling their stories. And, it's always fascinating. So
And it's not prepackaged. And I think that's the
No,
big, yeah.
absolutely. And again, I mean, no, we didn't rehearse this, kids, as you can tell by my hair. Tevye, question. Speaking of Superman, I was rereading Superman Rebirth and Action Comics Rebirth. I was wondering how you and Pete Tomasi came up with the amazing Superman Reborn story with the John, John being kidnapped by Mixias Pitalik.
Yeah. Well, okay, so if we go back to Rebirth, at that time, I had done the Lois and Clark miniseries where we saw them. We found out previous version of Clark has been here on the planet, had its son, all that stuff, living on the farm in California, and DC decided that he was going to be the Superman again, and it's like, okay, how do we make that work? And the feeling at DC was that we had to do something that didn't just eradicate the Superman they had been publishing for a couple of years and his relationship with Wonder Woman and all that. And Pete and I think we're more or less willing to just push that aside and go forward, but we understood you want to be fair to the readers because there were readers who really liked that. So we got together in a room. It was me, Pete Tomasi, Jeff Johns was there, the editorial crew on the book at the time. Bob Harris and Dan DiDio would pop in here and there, and we would just talk about how are we going to realign this. And we kind of got on this notion that what character could possibly have been involved and orchestrated something to that level. And we came up with Mixias Pitalik, and who was just nutso enough and balanced enough in other worlds and universes and everything that we thought we could pull it off. And that's why. And plus, Mixie is one of those villains that is, for a Superman writer, using Mixias Pitalik is incredibly compelling. And the reason is because you can go anywhere. You can do anything with it. But it also means you can only use them once every few years.
Sure.
Really? It's like Mixias Pitalik is like having a giant piece of cake with a lot of frosting on it. You can't eat that 3-4 times a day and nothing else.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's exactly what he is. And actually, I think that came through in the story too. So that's where we first started to put that thing together. And, the Rebirth stuff was really a lot of fun. For us, having books that came out every other week for a writer, I mean, it's a lot of work and the pressure is on, but boy, it allows you to tell stories in a different way than you can if they only come out once a month. And it was so effective for us because, Pete and Pat Gleason on their book kind of focused on one part of Superman's life. I was dealing with kind of the other one, and then we could cross over when we needed to. It was a really effective way to tell stories. And I thought in that time with DC, where we had, a couple of Green Lantern books twice a month and then Batman books and everything else, there was this rhythm to it. It was a publishing plan that I think really, really worked well. And from a writer's perspective, like I said, fun way to write because you could spend more time with kind of the secondary cast and explore them more than you would otherwise.
Agreed. And it was honestly, I felt kind of a redemption for you because during New 52, it was you, wasn't it you and George initially on Superman, George Perez?
Actually, not quite. It was George was writing and drawing it, and he left, and they then came to me and Keith.
Excuse me.
Yeah. And George kind of said, we both called him up and said, well, George, what happened? And he said, don't do it.
Really?
Yeah, he did. He said, George's frustration on it was that he said, I never felt like I was doing Superman, and I certainly wasn't doing the Superman I wanted to do. I wouldn't even have said that, but I think he was fairly open about saying it at that time. That's kind of what we ran into a little bit as well.
They made Superman so different that you lost the character. I completely agree. I mean, good Lord, to the point where they didn't even have the Spit Girl. And it's like, it's Monel in a different Superman costume. And
Yeah.
then and to me, and God, good people worked on that period. So
Yep.
no disrespect to anybody. I mean, I remember you too talking to Rags Morales when he was drawing it with Grant and everything.
Yeah.
But
Which
God,
was a great book. I
that
really,
initial year one, I
oh
agree.
yeah, that was
interesting.
fantastic. And this idea of, Superman in the blue jeans and the t-shirt, they did a marvelous job. But setting up the backstory. So their stories were taking place sort of in the beginning, whereas our Superman, by the time we were doing it, had been Superman for what, like 10 years. Yeah. And it was, he was wearing armor. And I'd always ask, why is Superman wearing armor?
I know.
You can never get an answer.
They all were. And I know, man. And it's like, there were a lot of aesthetic choices that just didn't feel right. And God, when there was like a big crescendo of Lois exposing Clark's identity, it's like, that's not Lois. That's not Clark. She would never do that. I mean, and again, that's why it was so great that you guys were able to bring back the original Superman. And also, I loved it at the beginning in that Lois and Clark miniseries where he's operating covertly. He's got the black suit. Although, if he really wanted to be covertly, he wouldn't have had an S on his chest.
Well, there is that.
That's toyetic. I understand. That's for toy purposes. But his long hair and his beard. I mean, it was just like, oh, there he is. That's awesome.
To this day, what's really interesting is, I'll be sitting at a con, right? And there's always in terms of cosplay, there's a couple of guys in a Superman suit walking around. And every now and then it'll be the guy wearing the black suit. And whether it's the one from that era of, pre-rebirth, which is what I call our miniseries, or, the one we did during the death of, they're pretty close. But I'll sit there and go, my God, that looks good.
Yeah, man. No, I'm surprised, especially when he came back after being dead, that they didn't stick with that. The only thing they stuck with was the mullet, which is hilarious.
Yeah.
Oh, well. That's Wayne agrees. Wayne says armor and high collars were ridiculous. So what are you going to do? Let's see here. Let's see. First of all, Jikuro wants to know what is your opinion of when Booster was on the animated Justice League Unlimited?
I thought it was a lot of fun. Obviously, they treated the character a little bit differently than we do in the comics, which they made him, what would you say, a little bit more of an outcast and less accepted, I think, by the other characters. But I understood why, and it made sense. But overall, I thought it was good. It was a lot of fun. They did some great stories.
Every season I considered all, starting with Justice League and ending with Justice League Unlimited, 7 great seasons. Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, that was a great animation era. Bruce Timm and company.
Oh, 100%.
I'm learning to draw as I love Dan Jurgens' art. I hope he does another How to Draw book.
Oh, yeah. No plans at present. The one I did took me about almost a year to do. I had done How to Draw characters, How to Draw Marvel Characters, I think it was called, from Dorling D&K Press. And that came out again, was that 2003, 4, somewhere in there? But it was a lot of work, and it's nice to have a book. But boy, like I said, it took almost a year. And people would say to me, "What, did you take a year off?" It's like, no, I worked my ass off on something, and it didn't come out until now. Yeah.
Wow. No, I hear you, man. Well, even reaching back, I told you, God, thank God for Marvel Unlimited. And I got to admit, I haven't really explored DC Universe as much, but I was telling you, I went back and read your Thor run and that 2170 story arc. And man, that if someone is looking for great Asgardian stories, although it's set in the future, very Games of Thrones, very I, Claudius, a lot of plotting and scheming going on. And I just, we see Thor's son, which is amazing.
Yeah.
Oh my God, what a great epic story! And was it you and Scott Eaton throughout, or was it? other artists prior to that?
Scott did a lot of it, but we had several different people who were working on it at that time, and kind of, because it was a lot of work and it was coming out monthly. So we had a lot of different people working on it at that time. Scott drew an awful lot of it, and he's absolutely fantastic. But it's one of those things where, I will hear writers say, I go where the story takes me, right? And I always look at that and say, that's a bit of a cheat because you're still in control. But that story was a bit of an instance where I went where the story took us. And it was all rooted around the fact, even when I did Thor 1, which John Romita Jr. was the artist the first couple of years on.
Oh, yeah.
But I said, this is a god. He's not going to step away from that fact, and he's going to play it up. And so if he lands on the street, as people talk to him and say, women will give him their phone numbers or whatever, and stuff like that will happen. And if they say, are you a god? And Thor will say, verily, of course I am. Yeah. And kind of embrace that concept. And the more you embrace that, the more that took us, that we just followed where the story went.
That went more than 12. How many issues did that go?
Oh,
18?
It was definitely more than that. Really, if you
24?
play it all out, it's over 2 years. Yeah.
Oh man. And listen, everybody, and I'm with everyone else who gives it up to you and Johnny Romita for your Thor run. But this story, I don't remember reading, 15 years ago, whenever it came out, or even longer, as you said, late 90s, was it?
I started Thor in 98. By the time we got to doing that was probably more around 2003.
Okay.
2002 to 4 is probably about the time frame that fit into. Yeah.
That sounds great. Well, again, what it evolved into with that story in particular, I don't remember reading back in the day, and I was blown away. And truly,
the other part of it is, people would always ask me, why do you want to write Thor? Because you already had written Superman and they're the same character. And it's like, no, they are not. They're not at all the same character.
Oh.
They might have the same power level, but that's it. Superman goes out of his way to be human and embrace humanity. Thor is a god who I think is still perplexed by humanity. Yeah.
Agreed.
And that made them very, very different to me.
Yeah, and in fact, maybe Odin, obviously to teach him humility, turns him into Don Blake.
Yeah.
But also, again, I think I do appreciate when Thor is confused. I think there's great story to come from that. And that 2170 story just got really amazing. And it's like, what is he doing? And then to the point where it's like, he hasn't picked up the hammer and he may not be worthy anymore. And it's like, and I love that Jason touched on that as well when he made Jane Foster Thor, and also coming out of, I think it was Original Sin. And I forget what sin that, was revealed, but all of a sudden Thor couldn't pick up the hammer anymore.
Yeah. And seriously, even when I was doing it, as I was winding it down, Tom Brevoort was the editor on the book, and he and I had conversations of, we knew we were going to have to rehabilitate the character had I stayed on. And whether I stayed on or not, whoever was going to write Thor, there is going to have to be some level of rehabilitation that goes into it at that point, no doubt.
Absolutely, man. No, that's outstanding. Now, Tevye, this is interesting, Tevye, because we covered this when we did that conference of Spider-Man writers last summer. But, pardon me, not that one. It's here. Just wondering what happened with your Spider-Man run with Ben Reilly.
Oh, sure. So Marvel, it's funny, and some of this even came out when we did the panel in Connecticut last year. With the success of Superman, the death of Superman and everything, Marvel was kind of looking like they wanted their own equivalent event for Spider-Man, which is when they got into the clone storyline. And as they were doing that, they approached me and said, when we come back, we're going to go with Ben Reilly, Spider-Man, Ben Reilly being Spider-Man's clone. Would you like to come do Spider-Man? I said, well, I've always wanted to do Spider-Man. That sounds interesting. Let's talk. So we kept talking, and I came on board, and we started with Sensational Spider-Man number 0. And I was writing it and drawing it with Klaus Janson inking it. And I came in, and really what they had wanted in our initial discussions was to convert to Ben Reilly. Peter Parker goes away. And they start doing classic sort of Spider-Man stories. And when I say classic, it doesn't mean Peter is 16 again as Ben Reilly and, it's the same stuff over again. They wanted that spirit. And as we got into it, and I think this also came out in the panel, didn't it, John, that Marvel kept changing their minds.
Yes.
And on Monday it was this, and Tuesday it was that, and yes, we want to do this, and no, we want to do that. And one day, yes, it's yes to Ben Reilly, and the next day it's no, and it's embrace Peter Parker, and he's still married to Mary Jane, and it was going back and forth. And what I began to realize is that I was not going to be able to tell the types of Spider-Man stories that I wanted to tell. So I just said, I think it's best if I step aside here. And I did. And, we still had a good relationship and everything, because I was back like 2 years later to do Thor, but it just wasn't the right way for me to do Spider-Man at that time.
I understand, man. No, I totally understand. And again, I would point people to that panel. You can find it on the Word Balloon feed if I haven't reprinted it. I call my reruns reprints.
Okay, there you go. Why not?
But
you call this thing Word Balloon. It only fits.
I think I
don't see any word balloons.
I want to lean into, and when I eventually start writing the Word Balloon book, which I'm sure I've discussed with you in the past, I'm going to get off my ass and do it, man. But I also think, again, I have so many wonderful conversations like this one that it's like I should do annuals. That's what I should do.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
A good friend of mine is like, "Do you have enough material for a book?" I'm like, "I have enough material for about 24 books, really, man." I'm like, "Absolutely." So, but I have this problem, Dan, and as a writer, I'm sure you could see this as well, where I'll get a new interview, like, "Oh, I want to include that one. I want to include that one," and it's like, all right, you got to stop, man. And that's why maybe I got to do annuals. But like I said, I was a good writer when I had deadlines. When I wrote for Boxing Illustrated and I had to get my reports in for the next issue, I was a beast. It was great.
Oh yeah.
But doing flying by the seat of my pants here, doing these kind of conversations, I enjoy doing it. I mean, as you know, I've been a broadcaster for over 30 years. So what are you going to do?
Writing is hard work.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
It is. Yeah.
Indeed. And that's why I respect you guys so much. And that's how I felt about my boxing friends that are writers as well. No, it is serious business.
Well, it's along those lines. It's funny because one of the eternal questions in comics is who has it easier, writer or artist, right? That's one of the eternal questions. And so typically the way artists always look at it is time, which is you tell me to draw the Charge of the Light Brigade going up the mountain. It takes me 3 weeks to draw. You typed it out in 30 seconds, that kind of thing. But the difficulty of writing is I think artists always look at writers as how long did it take to write that one page, that one panel, that one issue? The time that goes into cultivating a series over the long term is tremendous. So I'm just the one who always says to artists, it's not as easy as you think. And I think most artists who have started writing kind of find that out. And I say to writers, drawing it isn't as easy as you think either. So it's work either way.
Understood. Stephen Commander, great question here. You were the unofficial writer of The Atom in the 90s, from JLA to Zero Hour to Teen Titans. Any plans to return to Ray Palmer in the future?
Not for me. I don't even know what state Ray Palmer is in right now.
I don't either.
When was the last time we would have even seen him?
Well, they did bring him back, I think, recently, and certainly in the rebirth period.
Okay.
And they must have, I would hope that while Legends of Tomorrow and him being on TV, that they were smart enough to, say, hey, let's get some Ray stuff out there.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, Ryan Choi has certainly been promoted, and more prominent. But I don't know. Let's see. Oh, I did want to. Are we okay for time, Dan? We're over an hour.
We're doing fine.
Excellent. Because I do want to talk about other things. We've been talking about John Kent. you're back on John Kent now in Action Comics.
Yep.
And with the start of 1051, what what can you tell us about your plans for John?
So, and I think that one of the things DC recognized is that there was a hunger out there for more stories about John Kent when he was a kid. I mean, the Super Sons franchise is a great one. And there again, the work that Pete Tomasi did on that was fantastic. And they just had a movie. So
yes,
I think they said, let's tell some stories about young John Kent back when. And so what we did is coming out of the Death of Superman anniversary special, there was a big fight in Metropolis. Streets got torn up. Daily Planet building got damaged. And so Perry White says to the workforce, well, coming in is kind of tough. Why don't we all go work remotely for a bit? And Lois and Clark say, well, for us, remotely is going to be California. And they go back to the farm that we introduced in the Lois and Superman and Lois miniseries that I did with Lee Weeks. We have Lee Weeks back drawing this. So it's this fun look at the three of them as a family unit back in California. Now, by this point, John's powers have emerged. So he has some capabilities. And of course, where John goes, trouble follows. That's just the way it has to work out. So we are going to be doing a 7-part story in Action. Once again, Lee Weeks, who to me is just one of the absolute most brilliant artists out there right now. I first worked with him on Thor long ago at Marvel, and we continue to enjoy collaborating. So he's just doing wonderful stuff on this. So yeah, it started in Action Comics 1051 that came out just 2 weeks ago, I think. So check it out. Yeah,
absolutely, man. And yeah, Lee's great. I finally got to meet him at C2E2 last year.
Oh, good.
We hung out at the bar, and yeah, he's good. This is the thing, Dan. I meet you guys, and it's like, yeah, come on, word building, and it's like, yeah, that was last year. It's like, God damn it. And I mean, that was 2 years ago. It's like, son of a bitch. All right, we've got answers to where Ray has been. Art Burrow Snake says Ray was found in the Microverse in Justice League of America by Steve Orlando. And then Steve Commander says Ray Palmer was last seen in Bendis's Justice League Superman run, but he wrote Ray like Brainy Smurf.
Okay.
So that's great. Yeah, and then Tevye says, I love seeing the Superman family back and having kid John meet this cute girl is adorable.
Yes. Yeah. And of course, like I said, where John goes, trouble tends to follow. So I think we're off on a rollicking good adventure.
That's awesome. And also I want to acknowledge, shame on me, man. I didn't know you were doing Lord of the Jungle at Dynamite.
Yeah, Lord of the Jungle at Dynamite with Benito Gallego drawing the book. And this one is a lot of fun. And I as a kid, I remember going to the Saturday sort of matinees that they would put together with Tarzan movies from like any era. But, you got in for next to nothing. So, that's what you get. But there was also the Ron Ely Tarzan
the TV show. Absolutely, man.
This was so much fun. And so kind of loyal to it and everything. And I remember, reading, Edgar Rice Burroughs' first Tarzan novel. I must have been probably like 5th grade at the time. So I've always had this love of the character. So when the opportunity came up to do this, I said, yeah, let's go for it. Just do something a little different here. And so it's published by Dynamite Comics. We've got 3 issues out now, I think, so far.
Yeah, that's the 3rd cover there that we had.
Yeah. So yeah, it's been and that's a wonderful Gary Frank cover. Yeah. So first issue. And Gary Frank does such wonderful straight on compositions. I just go, shit, I wouldn't have thought of that. I mean, gosh, I just look at his stuff. I just love it. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun because it's been different. And that's what I've liked about it.
Do you get to choose your collaborator, or did Dynamite put you guys together in terms of art or even other projects and stuff?
In this case, I have not met Benito. I was not that familiar with his work, and we went through looking at a lot of different people, and then finally, when they showed me Benito's stuff, it was like, go for it, and it's because he had been doing Tarzan in a foreign market. So he already has that familiarity with the character. And quite honestly, Tarzan as a property has always been something that is kind of an artist's artist kind of book.
Agreed.
I mean, whether it was Joe Kubert or John Buscema, I mean, you go all the way back, Russ Manning. I mean,
Grell.
yeah.
No, you're right.
When did you ever get disappointed in a Tarzan job, right? Because there's a certain standard to it. So we were able to get Benito to come aboard and do it. And because you have to have that command of wildlife, the interest and the commitment to do it. And he absolutely does. So it's a pleasure to work with him.
And dude, I'm so glad you mentioned reading the Burroughs stuff when you were a kid. Again, that was a wrinkle of our generations in terms of they would reissue these paperbacks of these pulp novels and stuff, and the opportunity to read Walter Gibson's Shadow and Burroughs doing Tarzan and John Carter, all those great characters, even things that didn't last very long, like the Avenger, the original Avenger.
Oh yeah, don't forget Doc Savage.
And Doc Savage, and that's what I was saying, mentioning Ron Ely.
Yeah.
What a missed opportunity, that movie, because nobody else could play Doc Savage of that era. And
there's that great clip of him standing on the running board because they said it back in the 30s or 40s, right?
Yeah.
He's standing on the running board of the car and the shirt is all wrapped up and it's raining and he's pointing straight ahead and everything. Yeah, there was a lot of fun stuff in that movie. A lot of fun stuff.
Yeah. Zach says, when you make a pitch, do you ever pitch as a writer-artist, or do they ask if you want to be the artist on a book?
Oh, it depends on what it is. So, I really find it interesting to write for other artists, and I find it interesting to draw for other writers, and I find it interesting to do both jobs myself. So, tomorrow, I'm actually going to start drawing a project that I'm also writing.
Great.
Recently, I had just drawn a book for DC that Mark Waid had written, Dark Crisis Big Bang. Right now, I'm writing for Lee Weeks. I think one of the things that keeps me fresh is that ability to do a lot of both. And that I always find, John, that I learn from the people I work with. Especially if I write for an artist long enough, I get inside their head a bit. I start to I don't just see what they do on the page, but I start to get an understanding of what it's going to look like when I write it and what they're going to draw in advance. And so you do kind of develop that sort of instinct. And at the same time, if I'm reading another writer's script and I start to then take it apart and do my thumbnail sketches where I lay it out and everything, it's the exact same thing. To me, the best example was I was fortunate enough to draw a few stories that were written by Archie Goodwin. Archie Goodwin, to me, was an incredibly visual sort of thinker in the way that he wrote his script. So is Denny O'Neil. But once I started to, when you draw a story, you really deconstruct it and assemble it at that point. So this is a long-winded way of me saying, I like to do it all in a different mix. And that is part of what helps to keep me fresh. And I think that being both a writer and an artist gives me an understanding of comics that I don't think necessarily too many people arrive at if they're just one or the other.
Fair enough. It's funny. I, again, using Marvel Unlimited you only did 2 issues with them, but I loved what you did with Christopher Priest.
Oh yeah.
On these last 2 issues of Captain America and the Falcon. It's a great story, but I mean, that's an interesting combination. Had you worked with Jim or Christopher back in the day?
What's interesting about it is that I hadn't collaborated with him as writer or artist, but he had been on staff at DC as an editor for a time.
Yes.
And we had talked about doing a couple of different things. And it was one of those things where, sometimes those conversations are casual and other times they get a little bit more in depth. And we bounced a lot of things back and forth. It just happened to be at a time where I was so incredibly busy that it'd be like, okay, in 3 years when I'm free, we can do this. And by the time that 3 years came up, he was no longer on staff at DC. But I will say, I mean, I respect him and his work so much. And one of the things that he had done, and I think he actually put this together while he was at Marvel. And when I say at Marvel, on editorial, before he came to DC, he did kind of a guide to doing comics sort of thing, which I remember he gave me years and years ago. And it's still floating around out there in different places. But it's just such a great on point command of how to do comics. And, it's the kind of thing that I think both companies should have on file to give to, new talent the day they walk in the door. And when I say that, I mean new editors as well. It was just a tremendous guide to the art of crafting comics.
Understood. I know Jimmy Palmiotti will work with younger editors, mentioning editors, and they almost the company was doing that to almost have and not to disrespect the position of editor, but like kind of help them out, and in those capacities. Do you work with younger editors, or everybody's younger than us, but you know what I mean? Right?
Yeah. Okay. Quite honestly, right now, that is sort of the situation that, everybody's younger than me that I work with. No, and there have been times when I had been asked to work with younger editors as part of giving them not instruction necessarily, but a little bit of a background on the mechanics of comics and how it all comes together. And, but that has always sort of existed that way, that, and I think even from my own personal perspective, when I would have been in the business for the first decade or so, the ability to work with older creators was so much fun. I really look back on it, and having been able to write for Gil Kane or John Buscema or Kurt Swan, or, you go down that list. I said this earlier, that I have learned from everybody I've ever worked with.
Absolutely.
And when you get to work with the masters, there's more to be learned.
And mentioning some of those great names, your Superman, was there a former Superman artist in mind? Because yours at the same time evokes kind of a Kurt Swan vibe with maybe a Murphy Anderson inking, but it is still your own. And I don't know if what you had in mind when you were doing it.
One of the stories, and I've told this before, that I'd been at DC, and I started at DC drawing a book called Warlord, and did a couple of Batman issues and things like that. Yeah. And one day I was talking to Karen Berger, who was at that time editorial coordinator. Editorial coordinator as a position is sort of looking to fill holes in the schedule. Like, Kurt Swan needs a break on Superman. We need somebody to do an issue or two. She asked me one day, she said, "Can you draw Superman?" And honest to God, I said, "No, I can't. Only Kurt Swan can draw Superman." That is the Superman I grew up reading. So I think it definitely made an impact on me. So if you say there are aspects of Kurt's approach to Superman, I don't doubt that one bit.
I love it. And yeah, man, I felt the same way. And I mean, hey, when Byrne came in, that was great. And yourself and Ordway and the others subsequently, and John Bogdanov and everything. Everyone's interpretations were great. But yeah, man, I don't know. There's just some comfort food level based on our ages. And again, when we were 10 years old, who was drawing Superman and stuff. And yeah, and I really loved the way it evolved. Because I mean, I was, as you were as well, we benefited from the 80-page Giants and the 100-page Spectaculars. So not only do we get current Kurt Swan with Tex Blaisdell or whomever was inking him, but we got the old stuff as well.
With George Klein or somebody like that, and it was wonderful to see. And and seriously though, I still say what John did when he came was brilliant stuff. I think. Yeah, John's Man of Steel miniseries that set everything up, to me, is still brilliant. It's just a brilliant piece of work, and it really is what freed us up to do this stuff we did when we came in behind him.
Outstanding, man. Henry wants to know what book you've always wanted to work on. Are there ones, Dan, that you haven't had a chance to?
Yeah, there are a couple. I've always had the affinity for the FF, the Fantastic Four, and I did
Sure.
get to do them. I have always found Iron Man so compelling, and part of it was, that intersection of superheroism and business, which I think is just fascinating. And you can see even from a personality standpoint, there may be a little bit of that in Booster Gold. And I find Doctor Strange to be fascinating. So yeah, I've been very fortunate in that I've gotten to do most everything I've wanted to do. However, so my if you have that list of things to check off, there's a hell of a lot of checks on my list.
I assume Steve Commander wants you to do Sun Devils.
You know, I should find a way to sneak them in. And someone said to me after, I had mentioned the thing I did with Wade here recently, War Crisis Big Bang book. Someone had said, I'm surprised you didn't sneak Sun Devils in there. I just went, oh, how could I not? I should have.
That's awesome, man. No,
yeah.
It's funny when he said Sun Devils, I was thinking Sea Devils. I'm like, oh, I'd like to see that Dan Jurgens Sea Devils book. I love those non-costumed adventure books.
I did too. Cave Carson, Rip Hunter, all that stuff. Yeah.
I even Dan, I draw like a 7-year-old, but Art Baltazar and Franco and our friend Scoot McMahon will get me. We'll all hang out at a convention and they'll all be drawing, and they're like, John, draw. And I did my best looking at an old Silver Age Rip Hunter in the old space, jockey suit. And
sure, yeah.
And I'm like, and it was all right. It wasn't great. I got to find it. I got to post it here on Word Balloon. Henry also wanted to know. He asked about Ramita, but also in general, do you use full script or the Marvel method?
When I write for others, I go with the Marvel method. I want the artist to feel the freedom to create on the page and have a little bit of ownership over that real estate the same way I would. By and large, I tend to feel confined if I'm working from a full script. And there have been a couple writers that don't do that to me. I mentioned two of them in Denny O'Neil and Archie Goodwin. And there have been some others, but generally, I want the freedom to play around and explore on the page a little bit. I think when artists have that, they become more committed to the book. They become more committed to the characters, and they become more involved with the process of who the characters are and the understanding of the story. So that's just me. But, when I write for Lee on action, he gets a plot. When I am also writing a new project now that I can't mention yet, but it's a plot that is going to an artist, again, that I've worked with before, but this is one where it's especially essential that he feel the freedom that he has on the page. And I just, I think it makes for better comics. I really do.
I agree. We in the 90s, it was artist, writer. I got to get my hand in the camera.
Yeah.
And then it was writer artist in the early 2000s. And I think finally we're reaching a point because of collaborators like yourself that recognize. And I was always really happy for Pat Gleason getting the co-credit with Tomasi when they were doing Rebirth Superman and stuff. And I know Pat was very proud of his contributions to the story in general. And that's fantastic. Roberts is thrilled that we'll get an announcement soon that
this one is going to be a while, because this is this is going to take a long time for us to get it to the point where we can set it up and get the news out there, because this is one that isn't going to be out until 2024.
Okay. Oh, your run on Batman Beyond. He was wondering if what was the original plan with Tim Drake when you had John interact with Tim? Would that John story continue in that Batman Beyond future?
Well, that the whole idea of Tim Drake as Batman Beyond is something that spun out of the Future's End thing that I was doing with Jeff Lemire and Brian Azzarello and Keith Giffen. And we just wanted to do something with the character, but really it became apparent in a hurry that Tim Drake is not Batman Beyond. It's one of those things you can do for a bit, but ultimately you have to go back to it. And so it wasn't that much longer before I got Terry McGinnis back to where he should be as Batman Beyond, and went forward with that.
I'm glad they worked out if there were any sort of legal entanglements that kept them from making a Terry comic, because it is interesting, Dan, and even we've seen it in the chat of the kids now, they get introduced to these characters through the animation.
Oh yeah,
and it leads them to the comic. And although I know for myself, and again, I'm not that Dan. It's not that we're old; we're just not young anymore.
Well,
so you realize that. But I was going to say the '67 Spider-Man and those Marvel superhero cartoons. I saw them in afternoon syndication.
Yes,
that was my first introduction, and then of course, growing up with George Reeves Superman and Adam West Batman.
Yeah,
so those were my introductions.
I think Batman Beyond debuted in 1999. If that's true, that's getting to be a while ago now in and of itself. And it's cool because it was, at the time with the music and the opening and everything as it came out,
it
was a very abrupt sort of change, but super effective. So, but even that, Batman Beyond now has been around for over 20 years. So I don't think of it that way until I start to, plot it out.
The math. Yeah.
It's true. Yeah.
God, you're right. And Darwin Cook, of course, designed and drew that opening sequence with that amazing music.
Yeah.
And it really was just fresh and interesting. And just the whole Terry Bruce dynamic and, the way it all played out and everything.
And it felt like it was 20 years, 30 years in the future. It had that feel to it.
100%, man.
Yeah.
Henry wants to know, whose inks did you really like on your pencils? Guys like Joe Rubenstein, Klaus Janson, certainly Norm Rapmund. And am I saying his name right?
Norm Rapmund, yes.
Rapmund, excuse me.
So you've got Norm, you've got Joe and Klaus both, as he said. Brett Breeding goes into that, of course, as well.
Sure.
Dick Giordano, especially when we were doing Batman and Green Arrow.
Yeah.
I almost hate to list names because I know I'm probably forgetting some. Jerry Ordway on Zero Hour was so incredible. So
great.
Kevin Nolan on Superman Aliens and a few other things we have done since.
Yes.
So, it's there again. It gets into this idea of collaboration, and that's where I've been so fortunate to have, whether it was Dick or John Romita Sr. ink me or Murphy Anderson ink me, if I go back far enough, to then so many different people, because the level of talent that was out there is just incredible. And sadly now, as we get to be more and more of a digital medium, that fine art of truly illustrative inking is something that's sort of slowly fading away, which I hate to see happen. So that's where it's so nice to be able to continue to work with these guys.
That's amazing, because honestly, and I suppose I've heard things like that, but it felt like to me, once we went to the tablet, the clarity of the art that we're getting now on the tablet is gorgeous. I love physical media, but I have to admit, I get as many comic books digitally as I do hard comics these days. I sometimes save the hard comics for the collections and stuff.
Sure.
But oh my God, I really think art is really progressed, and it's sad if the inkers are being threatened in a just business way of transition. That's sad to hear. Nothing. All right.
Oh, well, no, it is sad to hear. It's a different technology. And so as it kind of emerges, I think most of us can easily recognize, for example, that which is done on paper, which had the brush and the pen and the quick, flick of the wrist. And that was done on a tablet. And it's not to say one is right or wrong. It's just to say that change is there.
Are you still working on paper, or are you
John, I'm a goddamn dinosaur. Of course I am.
Shut up. Yeah. No, but you've just explained. Hey man, listen, as we know, musically, we grew up on vinyl.
Yep.
And then vinyl was kind of outmoded in the 90s. And hey, guess what? Vinyl's back.
Vinyl is back, baby. Yeah.
I'm trying to analog recording has a truer sound. You can hear if it's a violin, you can hear the bow on the strings, and you get that clarity. And I know, working in rock radio for as long as I did, hearing the difference and stuff. And we had old 8-track machines that had amazing vinyl sound, or that kind of 8-track recording versus digital recording.
Right.
So I'm with you. No, and absolutely the same thing with art. So no,
Yeah.
that's cool, man.
Yeah.
So do you scan and then send? Is that what you do?
Yep. Yeah. And I'm still most of the times we'll take the boards and send them off to the inker for actually inking on the board, on the pencils, on the lead, rather than blue lines. So it doesn't always happen, but that's my preferred way of doing it.
Understood. No, and this is a constant conversation I have with the artists, and I appreciate the guys that can work with a stylus and do incredible things. God, I was watching a video of Dave Gibbons working digitally.
Oh yeah.
And that was really great to see. And I mean, hey, Dave's old school like you are and everything.
Oh yeah, I know. And I remember Dave telling me, gosh, this is probably 8 years or so, maybe even a couple more ago, that he was just starting to play around with it more and more. And he was explaining the difficulty of trying to master how to do some of it. But it was fascinating to hear him talk, because at that time he was just starting to wrestle with it and make that conversion.
I was forced to make the conversion in the late 90s, or actually, I guess it was, now that I think about it, was, I guess, 2000, 2001, from audio tape and having splicing tape and my China marker pencil and my razor blades to make the edits, to go digital. And it I'll be honest, it intimidated me.
Oh, I'm sure it did.
Thank God I had a very patient teacher that really helped me through it and everything. And now, again, digital is great for editing purposes.
Yep.
So funny, man. Well, listen, we can wrap here. You've been great with your time. I mean, I could keep on with you if you wanted to, but
you want to go another 10, 15?
You'd like to. Hey, everybody. All right. Throw some questions up.
Yep.
But again, it's that's great that you're going back to John in his younger days. And I'm glad that there's room for those stories. And clearly that's the case. I love what Tom's doing with John as an adult. Do you want to write any John as a 20-year-old stories, or are there moments in your current action run that are?
I think for right now, I'm just going to focus on right where I'm at here, and part of it is because Tom and Philip are just doing their own thing with the Superman that is set absolutely in the present, and I'm very content to have this little world off of my own that just happens to have taken place in the past, because I think there's a certain charm with John that exists. The other part of it is that change in that aging process was so abrupt. When he's aged, you can continue to see that relationship with Superman much more easily, because they can be in action together. In many ways, it was Lois is the character who was sort of shortchanged in that, because we did not get to see how she was a mother to John. Yeah. And so it's fun to be able to go back and fill in some of those blanks.
Fair enough. Now, Tevye, we were just talking about Future's End, an event book that you were involved in. Would you want to go back and do an event book at some point? Yeah, I see the face.
I don't know. When I did 0 Hour, so
yes,
if anybody remembers.
Shame on me, of course, 0 Hour as well.
I think that was 95. And it was a 5-issue series that I wrote and drew that came out weekly. Now, these days, if there's a kind of a crossover series like that, generally they have 4 different artists work on it or something. And this was pre-computer for the most part. So at that time, on my floor, because it crossed through the entire DC line, I had a stack of scripts for every title in the DC line that went ship week by ship week alphabetically. And my studio became almost uninhabitable at that time. And out of all the projects I have ever worked on, that's the one that came closest to putting me, 6 feet under, because by the time it was done, to both write and draw a crossover that came out weekly, no one else has ever done that, and that's why. So I think I did my time.
Jesus. God, look at, you're right, 52 was weekly. They had 4 writers. They
Yeah.
had Giffen doing breakdowns and a bunch of artists.
Yep.
So no, I
One of
hear
these
you.
was me. I mean, I did backups and then I did a few issues of that as well. So yeah.
You killed off the Justice Society for a minute. I was very mad at you, Dan.
I gave them two paths to take on that one. And my preferred one was we create one more Earth that is perpetually 1944. And that's where that Justice Society is unknown to the other guys. Or we progress through the ages and we know which one they pick because that's the one that was published.
That's the one that was published. Oh, I would have loved a 1940s never-ending Earth and stuff like that.
That's just what it would have been. And that goes back, John, to what we talked about earlier, where sometimes heroes set in the time that they were created in is absolutely the way to go. And I think the Justice Society is so rooted in World War II that would have made a lot of sense.
I so agree with you. Well, again, as we said earlier, put them where they were created and stuff, and that is their strength. I love what Jeff is currently doing.
I do too.
The Justice Society. I think that's great. And Jeff, like yourself, Jeff gets it. I mean, he's
he loves
it.
And not only does he get, but his absolute grasp of the Justice Society and those characters and the way they interact, and he has proven it time and time again, is just so on point that he's absolutely the guy who should continue to do it.
Absolutely. Steve Commander wants to know, was it always the plan for Mr. Oz in your mystery story of Superman? Was it always supposed to be Jor-El?
So we were not the first ones to introduce Mr. Oz. There had been an Oz, kind of introduced before that they wanted us to pick up on. And we did that. And that's when we did decide that it would be Jor-El, but he was one of several considerations. I think that had always sort of been the loose intent. And we just decided to go with that. Yes.
That was great. I really loved an unstable Jor-El.
Oh, yeah.
They coming back going, hey, you're doing it wrong.
Well, and it's the beauty of it to me was that, so once you have John, that sort of stabilizes Superman's life almost too much. So
Agreed.
Then how do you upend? Because, that's part of what we have to do is we upend these characters' lives.
Of course.
Peter Parker always had to find medicine for Aunt May while he was getting punched out by the lizard, right? And that's where, Jor-El came in to upend that life.
That's fantastic, man. Somebody had asked earlier during your run either at DC or Marvel, did you want to use a character? And we're told no. And I'm sure it was situational.
Yeah. Yeah, it did happen several times. And usually it wasn't because, no, you can't touch this guy. It was because, no, that particular character is off on the planet Mercury or something like that. Sure. I mean, and if you can wait in 6 months, then you can have him. I mean, that kind of thing often happened. There was never that I can remember an absolute no, you cannot use character X. So it was always just based on, in their own book, they just got their arm cut off. So if you can't use him, so he doesn't have a left arm, something like that.
All right, final question, Stephen Commander. No other questions, everybody, because Dan's been ridiculously generous with his time. But he wants to know who was or is supposed to be the Black Beetle.
We just revealed who the Black Beetle is in the Blue and Gold miniseries. The trade paperback came out probably in November. We did an 8-issue series, and we did reveal in the last issue who the Black Beetle is. You can either read it, or I can be the big spoiler right here or now. So
make him buy the book, Dan.
Make him buy the book. I like that marketing attitude you have. Yes.
I would have conversations with Jeff Johns, and we'd go on, and as soon as we're off the record, he's like, you want to know what happens? I'm like, no. I appreciate you. And I know he was so excited. He wanted to share. Vanita Rogers would tell me, she's like, he does that to me all the time. I'm like, oh, yeah. I get it. And he's excited. But I'm like, Dan, I like my presents on Christmas Day.
Sure.
I'm happy to wait and be surprised. God, and it's so funny because this culture now, everybody wants spoilers. Everybody wants to know now. And it's like, why deny yourself the journey of the story?
That's right. Yeah. And because all of us, if we think back, some of our favorite moments are turning the page of a comic book and just being what? You got to be kidding. You can't be serious. And in this business now, because of the way we solicit comics, it's harder and harder and harder to surprise the reader that way. But when you can do it, you got to go for it.
Hey, man, Mr. Oz being Jor-El. It's like, what?
There you go.
How did that happen?
Yeah.
God, look at him. He's all fucked up, too.
Yeah. Well, I've always said that if I go back to when Superman died and we were able to come back with 4 characters claiming to be Superman.
Yes.
No one saw that one coming. These days, we never could have kept that secret. I mean, that would have been out there way in advance. And never mind that one of them turns out to be a bad guy. Cyborg Superman.
Right.
Yeah. So, we never could have pulled that off now. And I'm glad to have worked at a time when we could.
That I love that Hank Henshaw shows up every now and then.
Yeah.
And it still shows up and is still a threat. And I love the Eradicator as well being Superman.
Oh, yeah. It's well, and the Eradicator kind of represents this Kryptonian past thing that I think is still so effective. And
agreed.
Yeah. And, Superboy was sort of the classic Superboy Superman. So we captured different archetypes and built it in, and, people loved it. That's
awesome. All right. That's it. I feel
okay.
There is one last one if you want it. It's up to you.
Is it a good one?
I suppose. I don't know. Was wondering if there was a plan to bring Connor back during Rebirth, and he is back. I don't know.
He's back now. I think that there's something about Superman that is best rooted in the phrase "last son of Krypton." I think Superman, when he's isolated, is a better Superman, because I think there's always this aspect of loneliness to Superman. If you truly understand him, there's this aspect of loneliness that I think we have always felt as readers, right? And so I think that, especially once he has a son, I don't know that you need a Connor. Then it gets to be like too much, and I think there's so much value to last son of Krypton that identifies who Superman is in a lot of ways that I've always embraced that. And I think that's what should be embraced.
I do know, talking to Philip and Josh, that they are going to almost address Connor and John and their dynamic, both being around the same age now. And that, John obviously being the true son of Superman and Lois. And then the outsider, really now the loner is Connor, who being the clone and also having Luthor DNA in there and stuff, that's kind of his journey. But I understand what you're saying, and I so agree. But honestly, I appreciate that John has evolved from the punk that he was in the 90s and the brat, and that he has kind of matured. I also loved, we haven't talked about it, but some of those great HBO Max shows. I wasn't crazy about the first season of Titans. It grew on me fast, though, and I'm sorry to see it go. I'm sorry to see Doom Patrol go. I think they're excellent shows.
Yep, they were great, and we'll see what happens with all this stuff. It's going to be quite a change. We can still kind of get excited about what's coming and still look at the past and kind of go, yeah, but I'm going to miss that too. And that's kind of the way life is supposed to work, I think.
Yeah, but also I really think like the Arrowverse, come on, 10 years. Yeah. That's great. Smallville had 10 years.
Well, yeah.
I mean, and again, these are great ideas. I welcome the fresh ideas. And Dan, truly, to wrap up, we're all so excited that Booster is part of the plan, and rightfully so, because again, hey, here's hoping, much like Tom King is part of the writing circle. I am saying this, everybody. Dan is not saying this. I certainly hope that they, at the very least, come to you in some sort of consultant capacity to help them along, because James Gunn certainly seems to understand and appreciate a lot of these interesting heroes, and Booster is certainly one of them.
Yeah, it looks that way. That's great.
Beautiful, man. Well, dude, you, as always, you're so generous with your time. Can't wait to see you. Do you want to say what shows you're going to do coming up?
Coming up, the next one up is next month is going to be GalaxyCon in Richmond, Virginia. And then I think there's one in between. I know at the end of April, I'm at is it Amazing Con in Las Vegas? It's in Las Vegas. I think it's called Amazing Con.
I believe that's
So,
the name.
yeah,
Yes.
and that'll be my first time there. So I'm looking forward to it.
That's interesting. Do you know the venue? Is it at one of the hotels?
I'm not sure. I know I'm booked into it. Beyond that, I'll be there. That's all I can say right now.
I had a good run of going to Vegas when I was writing boxing.
I bet you did.
Cover a lot of the big fights, and
Yeah.
and no, it's kind of perfect. That's like, and a con is like the right amount of time. You want like 3 or 4 days, and then get the hell out of town. Whether you're up or down, time to leave, man.
Okay, very good.
There's my tip for you. Absolutely.
All right.
Way to go, Dan. I'm so excited. We're excited about what you're doing with John Kent in action, and certainly with Lee Weeks, and the Lord of the Jungle series with Dynamite. Wonderful. And I know that's a bucket list thing for you, so that's great. And certainly, again, the excitement about new Booster TV and likely new Booster comics to come as well from the man himself, Dan Jurgens. It's wonderful, Dan. Way to go.
We shall see. Thank you, John. Always fun.
Likewise, buddy. Truly.
All right.
Tomorrow night, everybody, we're Balloon Live. I'll be talking to Mark Russell and about his great body of work and what he's doing these days. And then we'll slide into next week, Valentine week. I know I'm talking to Robbie.
Be sure to ask him about Aaron Rodgers.
I will ask him about Aaron.
In the Room of Darkness.
I don't know what that means, but it sounds very interesting.
There you go. Okay.
Hilarious. Everybody, until then, stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy.